Watching cage side this weekend will be Niall McGrath. Good morning to you, Niall.
Hey lads, how you getting on?
Why, for the average viewer, would like myself, would you tune in this weekend? What are the main storylines?
Well, Darren, I think it's a captivating story. You know, such a young guy, a Scouser, a big draw here in the UK, and he's bouncing back from a world title loss at such a young age. And I think it's fascinating to see how Darren's going to bounce back. He's one of the biggest draws in the UFC. Sort of along the lines, a very brashy, sort of confident guy. But we've seen a very different Darren Till, I think, this week and since that loss to Tyron Woodley. He hasn't been as maybe trash-talkingly, emotionally aggressive as he's been in the past. But, you know, a guy who's very hyped up. And we've just got word he's actually just made weight as well. Weight's always been an issue with Darren Till. He's weighed in at 171 pounds this morning, just around the corner. So that's very good news for him. The weight cut seemed a lot easier than usual, but he is a huge draw here in the UK. There's big hype around Darren Till still.
There's an exceptional piece on that very topic up on our YouTube channel somewhere from the last 18 months, I think, Niall, that you've done with him.
Yeah, he's a fascinating guy, Niall. I often wonder to what extent is some of the things that he says in the press front. Like, you've spoken to him a couple of times, and obviously to people who kind of have a passing interest, the quote last year in August when he says, I've got a girlfriend who's nearly 7 months pregnant, I don't really care. I've got a daughter in Brazil right now who I haven't seen for 1 year, I don't really care. I just care about legacy and greatness. That's what I'm in this for. And I presume that was just kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of stuff, was it?
Yeah, I think that was tongue-in-cheek. You know, when guys are cutting weight as well and they're in a situation like that, they have to be selfish to a certain degree and cut out everything else in their life and everything else that's around them. And I think Darren retracted really that comment as well afterwards and basically said he was, you know, going through the motions during the weight cut on fight week. So yeah, I take that with a pinch of salt. It obviously stirred a bit of controversy, but Darren, I've sort of noticed in this fight camp and speaking to him and knowing Darren that he's very much along the lines of something that he learned from that Tyron Woodley fight. You know, his first loss of his career in a big fight. He hasn't talked the trash this week, as I said there earlier on. I think there's a different mental approach from Darren, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Or the other maybe interest for definitely Irish interest this weekend is Joseph Duffy, obviously Niall as well. He's a guy who's 31. He's had 2 defeats, I think, in his last 4. Is it a little bit of a make or break moment for him now?
I think so. It's a huge fight against Mark Giacchese for Joseph. I think Joseph, the problem has been there's been no real momentum. You know, he's had that shoulder injury, he's had rib injuries, he's been out for a year and a half. It's a big moment. Joe's a fantastic fighter, but it's about getting that fluency, that consistency going and some momentum in his career. And I think, you know, it is make or break time, Adrian. You're dead right when you say that, because in this division, in the UFC's lightweight division, it's the most stacked division in mixed martial arts. There's guys 1 to 15 in the rankings, and if you don't make a push, you're just going to get lost in there. And I think it is a big moment for Joe, and I expect him to win this weekend. I think it's going to be a big night. He's
been out for a long time with injury as well, and he's just back. And I was listening to him last night doing some prep for today, and he was talking about the recovery from the shoulder injury and how he felt at the time that it was affecting his ability to punch. Any indication that, because we haven't seen him in action since that, any indication that that's behind him now and there is a bit more freedom in it?
I think so, yeah. He was having a problem extending his hand fully even to throw a jab, so that's obviously a major problem. Then he had a rib injury, but as far as I'm aware, Joe's 100% fit, 100% good to go. And it's a tough opponent, and Mark Giacchese has. Mark's a guy who's, he is coming off 3 losses, but a guy that's coming into the UFC when he made his debut a couple of years ago with a huge amount of hype. He was one of the best talents in Europe. So, I wouldn't totally rule out Mark either this fight, but I think in terms of Joe, what he needs to do, I was speaking to his mum and dad last night, and they're actually staying in the hotel here where I'm staying, and they're very confident Joe's going to go in and get the job done on Saturday night. And it's interesting as well, Joe, the background of his story. Joe actually could have gone on to play pro rugby. He captained the school in Wales, where he grew up, and it was just really interesting to see that 2 or 3 of the players that actually play with him are actually pro 14 players for the Cardiff Blues now.
Yeah, and sort of the divergence on the road could have led him to a very different path this weekend. The Bellator versus UFC aspect of things, Niall, will you give us a few words on that? And then, because we've seen some big Bellator signings and big Bellator meets over the last little while. UFC obviously trying to keep their foothold there, but where does that overall business aspect of it stand? Interesting,
yeah. I think it's a big weekend for the UFC in terms of, their TV deal with PT Sport. They want to get as much social traction as they can. But in terms of Bellator and the UFC, you know, for me, all day, the better fighters are in the UFC. In terms of quality, standard, depth of divisions, that's not going to change for some time. I think it was very interesting to see, obviously, at Dublin, the traction was massive online from Bellator. And I just think that reaffirms the interest, even outside of Conor McGregor, that there is of mixed martial arts in Ireland. But you would, as a fighter, if you want to, you know, further your career, have a legacy, you'd still want to go towards the UFC. That's very much the feeling for me. But, you know, Bellator are knocking on the door. The UFC have announced a card in Sweden as well for, I think it's July. So it shows to me that they're reaffirming their stance in this market. And I think that is due to that Dublin Bellator card, which obviously did massive numbers for Sky Sports. And
if fans were to watch one other fight this weekend, I know Gunnar Nelson, obviously, it doesn't feel like he's Irish anymore. Watching your interview yesterday, he's turned his back on us.
I think there's another fight on the card. You know, I'm very, very excited about Joe Duffy's fight against Mark Giacchese. I know it's an obvious one to say, but just the styles in which both guys fight. You know, they love to stand on their trade and their feet. Both very fluent, good boxers. So that's the fight to watch for me. And obviously, there's a guy called Nathaniel Wood as well. He's fighting Henry Quinones as well. That's a really, really good fight. He's a big prospect here in the UK. So that's another one else to watch out for. But listen, top to bottom, Adrian, it's a really, really strong card. One of the strongest European UFC cards we've seen in a long time. So plenty of fights.
Good stuff. Lots more from Niall over the weekend. Thanks for the minute.
Lovely, lads. Thanks a million.
Niall McGrath on the line there from London ahead of a big weekend of UFC.